And here's a recap now of our main story. Ukraine and Russia have started their first talks since Russia's invasion, now in its fifth day. Ukraine said it would be pushing for a ceasefire and the withdrawal of Russian troops from its territory. The discussions are being hosted by Belarus in this room near the Ukrainian border. Ukraine's delegation includes the defense minister and the deputy foreign minister. Meanwhile, Ukrainians have been forced to take shelter as the Russian invasion continues. The government says it's still in control of all major cities, but pressure is growing on the strategic port of Mariupol. Kiev and Kharkiv have also endured heavy attacks. Ukraine says more than 350 civilians have been killed. And we're seeing live pictures now of the situation in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. These live pictures may suggest calm, but many people are still seeking cover in shelters and underground train stations. A general curfew kept people inside until Monday morning, but many still fear an attack on the city is imminent, and they're staying indoors. US officials said on Sunday that Belarus was preparing to send soldiers into Ukraine to support Russia's attack, and we'll bring you more on this as soon as we get it. Let's get the latest now from DW correspondent Fanny Farchar on the ground. She's in western Ukraine in the city of Khmelnytsky. Fanny, how has the situation developed in Ukraine overnight?
Everyone is on the edge. We are in the western part of Ukraine, but even here, sirens went off again in the middle of the night. People wondering what to do, go to the bunker. Does it even make sense to go to the bunker? Really, there is a feeling of, where are you really safe right now? But the shelling at least stopped for a few hours in the cities of Kharkiv and in Kyiv, but they started again just before dawn. So people there, especially in Kyiv right now, in the capital city, and in Kharkiv, where there are intense fighting that are ongoing between Ukrainian forces and between Russian forces, people who live in these big cities are especially concerned and worried, just not just for one, how those negotiations are going to go on today between a Ukrainian delegation and the Russian delegation, what consequences that's going to mean for Ukraine. But also simply people are panicking at this point, regardless which part of Ukraine you are, but especially in the eastern, in the northern and in the southern part of Ukraine, because those parts are intensely bombed and have been experiencing intense shelling over the course of the past few days since this full-scale invasion started last week on Thursday.
Funny, new satellite images show a Russian military convoy outside Kyiv that is nearly 5 kilometers long that suggests a major assault could be imminent. Is Kyiv prepared to defend itself?
President Zelensky, in fact, just announced that he's going to release prisoners with any military experience, with any experience to go to the front line and fight. Now, already a few days ago, he said, anyone who's able to hold a gun, please show up, I'll issue you a gun and make sure that you help the Ukrainian forces. So here you have it, of course. The Ukrainian government, of course, is very much aware of the fact that they are inferior compared to the Russian troops when it comes to the quantity of soldiers, the quantity of equipment. At the same time, that Russian force that is encircling many parts of the Ukrainian border and is invading on many parts from Belarus and from Russia, they're facing a very resistant population here. So not just the military force, but also a lot of civilians who are, by the way, just across from here, are signing up to be drafted, even the ones who are supposedly to be drafted anyhow, but they don't even want to wait for that phone call. They want to go to the front line, they want to fight, and they want to defend their country.
Funny, we're also getting reports, mainly on social media, of food shortages, supermarkets with empty shelves. What can you tell us?
Indeed, a lot of supermarkets and the ones who are still open actually have a problem providing just enough for everyone. But that doesn't mean that people do not have access to food, at least when it comes to places for example, like this one where we are right now. People are donating whatever they can for those who arrive here, IDPs, internally displaced people, but they also donate for people who live in this town. For example, elderly people who have no access to anything anymore. Their relatives have left or are trying to leave across the border. Close to here is the Romanian border, close meaning about a 3-hour drive, but at least closer than going towards Poland, which is about a 10-12-hour drive right now. So everybody's trying to pitch in here and trying to support each other. It's incredible and very impressive to me to see that in this very, very volatile time for Ukraine, for its security, but with possible implications, of course, for the rest of the world, people here on the ground are not hiding in their apartments. They're coming out, they're trying to support each other, and they want to motivate each other that they are going to win this very, very terrible fight that's going on right now over the sovereignty of their own country.
Funny, in terms of morale of the population, there's some strong signals of solidarity with the Ukrainian people coming out of Europe on Sunday from Germany, and the EU sending more weapons to hundreds of thousands of demonstrators across Europe calling for an end to Russian aggression. How is that being received in Ukraine?
One short answer, finally. That's the word that I've heard here quite often today. Finally, there's more arriving. I mean, we're speaking here about a 450 million increase of defense budget for the European Union to provide weapons, military gear for Ukraine for the very first time in EU history. Also, NATO's head Stoltenberg just announced that more is coming, more military support is coming from NATO. But you also have the voices of those who said, why actually just now? Why not even before this full-scale invasion started last week? And many others are also saying, how about sending European troops here, NATO troops? But of course, we all know that this is going to likely be an even bigger confrontation. Just imagine there were Russian troops facing US troops. This is definitely something it seems very much inconceivable at this point. But of course, with people bearing the brunt here in Ukraine, for them, everything is important, no matter at what price, as long as they have this feeling that there is really support coming, and not just words, but actually that the words of the Western allies among them are put in action for the support of the Ukrainian civilians especially.
Finally, we've talked about the peace talks that are happening today. Is it giving people, ordinary people on the street there in Ukraine, any hope?
Just the hope that maybe during that time while the negotiation is ongoing, maybe there's a pause in fighting. Having said that, no, actually people here on the ground, at least the ones I've been speaking to, say they don't believe this is going to bring any change, because after all, this negotiation is taking place while this country is being bombed by Russia, while aggression increases, while people are dying and are being injured. But they hope, at least, given the fact that this negotiation is to take place. After all, the Ukrainian delegation has also arrived, represented by the Ukrainian defense minister and also the advisor to the president, and also the Russians are there now. At least there's this little hope. Okay, so there is a door open to talk to each other, to listen to each other, and to somehow use that very small chance that there still is to avert an even a bigger escalation here, with implications not just for Ukraine, but really when it comes to the peace and the security architecture of the whole world.
DW correspondent Fanny Fatshar there reporting from Western Ukraine. Thank you, Fanny. Well, Ukrainian civilians have been pitching in to resist the Russian invasion. With their lives turned upside down, ordinary Ukrainians are getting involved in collecting donations and gathering supplies for the army. DW correspondent Matthias Böllinger met some of the volunteers helping refugees and soldiers in the city of Vinnytsia, southwest of Kiev.
They bring everything they can spare: clothes, food, money. As refugees move west and soldiers east towards the front, here in Vinnytsia in central Ukraine, people are organizing aid for both. Natalia, who doesn't want to give her last name, leads a youth center in peacetime. She's used to organizing outings and summer camps. Now, at war, she's busy directing volunteers and sorting donations. I never imagined I'd be doing any of this. I'm learning all the time. We're improving our work every minute. We are getting there. Vinnytsia in central Ukraine has so far been spared heavy fighting, although air raid alarms are frequent. But like everywhere in the country, people here have been under shock since Russia attacked. Now everyone wants to contribute. A wave of solidarity is running through society. Natalia is out and about around the clock. The nightly curfew is the only time she's not on site. I can't just sit home doing nothing and just waiting. I'm also definitely not leaving. This is our home that we love, and we're not going anywhere. It's not only about donating goods. Many also contribute their time making camouflage nets for the army. Green and brown clothes are separated from the donations and cut into pieces. The rest is a lot of handiwork. The Ukrainian army has been at war for 8 years, still lacking many basic items, including protective equipment. And many here have somebody at the front, a husband, brother, sister, or, in Natalia's case, a 19-year-old son. We are in touch. I can talk to him once a day. It's those few minutes that I'm waiting for all day. Being active is also a way for many here to deal with their worries.
Let's bring in Florian Zeriks from the International Committee of the Red Cross. He's covering Ukraine from the ICRC headquarters in Geneva and joins us from there. Florian, what's the Red Cross assessment of the humanitarian situation in Ukraine right now?
Well, the assessment is related to all the calls that we receive from people inside the country, from people outside of the country. We try to get in touch with their family members, with their relatives. And what we hear, first of all, is that like a lot of people tried to find shelter. They went in a shelter maybe 2 days, 3 days ago. They are still there. They went there with little supply, and now they are running out of food. They are running out of water. So these are like immediate urgent needs that we have already identified. Of course, like with people on the road, with the current restrictions that we've observed, we can expect also that people will be looking for shelter. So these are the most urgent needs. Of course, healthcare will be a major importance, and finally, probably like mental health care, because many people have already like faced years of conflict. Now, with this new wave of displacement, of violence, we can imagine that people will suffer even deeper mental health issues.
Do you have all the necessary means that you need in place, both in Ukraine and maybe also in bordering countries?
So the ICRC has been working in Ukraine for over 8 years now. We have like a big team in the country with about 600 people working with us. We had like specific activities in the eastern part of the country, and now, of course, like the needs are absolutely like tremendous. They are exploding all around the country. So, of course, it's changing. Of course, the means we used to have for specific needs will have to be reallocated, but there will be a lot of new needs that we are still assessing, and we'll need to find adequate way to respond to those needs.
Well, Ukraine has also asked the Red Cross to help with returning bodies of Russian soldiers killed in the war to their families back home in Russia. How has the Red Cross responded to that appeal? Can you help repatriate those bodies?
So we are aware of this request, and there is like a confidential dialogue that is taking place currently with the parties.
Okay. There are also international laws to protect civilians in a war based on the Geneva Conventions. Just talk us through those rules of war, and do you see them being upheld by both sides?
Well, we remind all the parties that they must respect civilians. They must respect essential infrastructures, civilian infrastructures. So we are in constant dialogue with the parties, and we constantly remind them of those obligations.
Florian Zeriks there from the International Committee of the Red Cross. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, I have a quick update for you on the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine that were planned for today. And we can tell you that the Russian and Ukrainian delegations have now begun those talks at the border between Ukraine and Belarus. European Union countries have also launched a huge logistical operation to deal with the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians who have so far fled their homeland. Long queues have formed at border crossings as people seek safety. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen promised EU countries would welcome them with open arms. Most of the refugees are heading for Poland. DW correspondent Max Zander is at a shelter at the border and sent us this report.
Exhausted, but happy to have made it to Poland. For Natalia Kuksa and her son Ivan, an opportunity to finally rest. Their group left Ukraine with the first alarm and only got here now.
I'm not scared about me and my son, but I'm scared about my husband, my parents.
Natalia tells us her husband had to stay behind. He may have to fight.
And of course, my son very cry when they because they separate, and he wanted to see the husband. Always call him and say, "I wanted to be with you."
A former warehouse now serves as a provisionary shelter, a safe haven for those who don't have anywhere to go. There is no shortage of donations, including food, diapers, and blankets. Most of it is handled by volunteers. People from all over Poland and even abroad are pitching in to help, with rides out of town and even places to sleep.
We are very concerned about everything that's happening. This is great injustice, and I think everyone should help.
Joseph, Eric, and Francis are also in need of help. The Nigerian students barely made it across the border, they tell us. This is not the only report of Africans having been sent to the back of the queue by Ukrainian border guards.
There was a lot of discrimination going on there, where we actually had to beg people to take us into the border so we could find a way to escape. But of course, racism, discrimination, no one listened to us because, of course, skin color and everything.
Back inside, Evgeny Kipichenko is waiting for his wife to reunite with him and his son Ilya.
It was a very hard trip for me.
For his mother, the trip isn't over yet. She is still stuck at the border after a night out in the cold. His mother is also under huge stress, but she is holding up. She is very strong. She is now helping other people with her at the border and trying to calm them down and offering her car so they can keep warm. Together, they plan to carry on to Latvia and then perhaps to England, just far enough away from the war.
Well, that report filed by DW correspondent Max Zander, who is now standing by at the Polish-Ukrainian border. Max, what's the situation with refugees where you are right now?
Right, Gerhard, it's a very busy morning here at the train station in Przemysl, a border town close to the Polish-Ukrainian border. This is a train station here, which would be the first point of entry for many of the refugees coming from Ukraine, crossing from Lviv to Poland. And a lot of these people who are here today have been on the road for multiple days. So they were in a very exhausted state here. But people are here actually providing some assistance. You can see there are volunteers here providing food and other items. And also people are here helping with further transportation to get people on the road to their next locations where they're going to.
Max, you've spoken to a lot of people who have just crossed the border. What are they telling you?
Right, so the situation on the other side of the border is still very, very difficult. If you look at the car crossings, we're looking at 20 to 30 kilometers of traffic jams, people who are trying to cross the border by car. The train service between Ukraine and Poland is also on a very irregular basis, so people are really on the move, and we're hearing that as many as 250,000 people are on the road from Lviv to Poland here at the moment, and there are major holdups. People are camping out, spending the nights out in the cold with insufficient, with lack of water, lack of food, and just trying to make it. And from what we're hearing, the situation is becoming a bit worse over the last hours and days, because people really spend days on the road now, and there is also situations where people have told us that there's a panic and some sort of altercations at the border on the Ukrainian side.
But procedures have been put in place to make crossing that border easier for Ukrainians. Are they being offered help to travel onwards?
Right, so the Polish authorities at the moment are not actually asking for any sort of documentation. That's what we're hearing. So you don't need a passport. They're letting anybody in on the Polish side. On the Ukrainian side, they're keeping men in of fighting age between 18 and 60 to serve in the military. But you can't actually go to Poland, and people are not really being registered here at the moment. The Polish government has said they'll take as many in as they can. As of now, we're looking at a number of roughly 250,000 people. As I said, another 250,000 probably on the road here. But there is a system in place, and it's largely based on volunteers, but also on the municipality. The fire brigade is here, the military reserve is here, and they're trying to organize buses to bring people to other parts of Poland and even to other parts of Europe. And the embassies are also on the scene in some of the refugee shelters that we've been to. We've seen representatives from the embassies of Pakistan, for example, or from Angola and other nations that are trying to bring their citizens home.
You've mentioned hundreds of thousands more refugees expected in the coming days. Do you think that Poland can keep up this level of influx of refugees?
I mean, it really depends. So from now, we've really seen there's been like this outpour of support by the Polish people for their Ukrainian neighbors. There's also a large Ukrainian community here in Poland that are also helping. Everybody's pitching in, and the government is also determined to help. The Polish Prime Minister yesterday put out a message that he was moved, and he was very happy of the support by the Polish people for the Ukrainian neighbors, and that the government will do everything that they can. And we're hearing that they're expecting close to 1 million, perhaps even more people coming. And from what we heard, Poland is determined to help these refugees. But at a later point, of course, we will have to see how the whole coordination works here on the ground, because the situation is developing very, very fast.
DW correspondent Max Sander there reporting from the Ukrainian-Polish border. Thank you, Max. Well, hundreds of thousands of people have protested against the Russian invasion in cities around the world. Here in Berlin, they rallied at the landmark Brandenburg Gate on Sunday. There were big demonstrations also in Paris, Madrid and a string of other capitals. People have also been attempting to protest in dozens of Russian cities, but they've been met by a police crackdown. A monitoring group says at least 2,000 people were detained, standing up against Vladimir Putin's war.
They were chanting "No to War" in Russia from St. Petersburg to Siberia, protesting their country's invasion of Ukraine. And in so many places, the script was the same. Inspired chants followed by action from security forces, often in riot gear. It can't be any worse. We're the aggressor state and people are dying because of us. I'm ashamed. I haven't been able to live normally for several days. I'm burning with shame. Ukrainians well away from Russia were meanwhile burning with pride. Their national anthem played outside the Russian embassy in Berlin. And over at the Brandenburg Gate, police left more than 100,000 people to chide Vladimir Putin and support Ukrainians.
It is our backyard. They are our neighbors, our brothers, our cousins, our co-workers.
Putin is bombing my country, which is Ukraine. He's killing people, killing children.
I wish I could do more, but coming here and showing our solidarity, showing that we really want the people of Ukraine to be safe.
The attack on Ukraine is an attack on us, on all our ideals, just like the Ukrainians have been telling us for the past 8 years.
Such support for Ukraine was also found in cities as varied as Paris, Erbil in Kurdish Iraq, Santiago, Chile, and the Lithuanian capital, Vilnius, where expat Belarusians protested their country's support for the invasion, also without police interference. But back inside Russia, in Yekaterinburg, east of the Ural Mountains, the voices of protest quickly muffled.
Well, up until last week, we thought it's carnival season right now. And one of the highlights in Germany is the traditional Rose Monday parade in the city of Cologne. But the much-loved event has been cancelled due to the war. In its place, a peace demonstration is being held today. And I'm now joined by DW correspondent Akanksha Saxena, who is in Cologne covering that story for us. Akanksha, what's happening in Cologne right now today?
Yes, as you can see behind me, thousands of people are rallying here in what is a peace march that takes place originally, as you said, as a traditional Rose Monday march, but it has been converted today as a protest for the solidarity of Ukrainian nationals, for the people of Ukraine and against the Russian war on Ukraine. I spoke to the organizers a while ago and they said war and celebration cannot go together. So they are marking this moment with people having placards against Russian President Vladimir Putin, against the aggression of Russia. I also spoke to a few Ukrainian students earlier who are not able to reach to their loved ones back in Ukraine, and they're very worried, but they're also very emotional that so many people have turned up in this parade today, and they are standing in solidarity with the Ukrainian people.
But normally the parades are a big deal. How are people feeling?
The mood is really somber. You can hear the music here, which is all about peace and anti-war. The mood is not that of celebration, but of somberness, of serious anti-war sentiment. People are here out with their families. It's sunny today. They're out carrying placards in support of Ukraine. And rallies like this are always the ones that are taking place around the world are a good chance to generate public opinion and to also have pressure on the governments around the world to do more to avert the crisis, to mitigate the crisis.
Thank you very much, Akanksha Saxena, there in Cologne for us. Let's have a quick recap of our main story. Ukraine and Russia have started their first talks since Russia's invasion, now in its 5th day. Ukraine said it would be pushing for a ceasefire and the withdrawal of Russian troops from its territory. The discussions are being hosted by Belarus in this room near the Ukrainian border. Ukraine's delegation includes the defense minister and the deputy foreign minister. Meanwhile, Ukrainians have been forced to take shelter again as the Russian invasion continues. The government says it's still in control of all major cities, but pressure is growing on the strategic port of Mariupol. Kiev and Kharkiv have also endured heavy attacks. Ukraine says more than 350 civilians have been killed so far. Well, Russia's President Vladimir Putin has put his country's deterrence forces, that includes its nuclear weapons systems, on high alert. In a video from the Kremlin, Putin said NATO powers had made aggressive statements towards Russia. He also pointed to economic sanctions that will cut off Russian banks from international transactions.
Not only are Western countries taking unfriendly economic steps against our country, I mean the illegal sanctions that everyone knows about very well, but the top officials of leading NATO countries are also making aggressive statements about our country. Therefore, I order the Minister of Defense and the Chief of the General Staff to put the deterrent forces of the Russian military to a special mode of combat duty.
Well, for more on that, we can now bring in Franz Stefan Gadi. He's a research fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. He's a defense expert focused on the future of war. President Putin has put his country's deterrence forces, including nuclear weapon systems, on high alert. How worried should we be about that?
Well, this is a highly escalatory, but at the same time, I'm afraid to say, expected step that Vladimir Putin would take in this regard, particularly since the advance of Russian forces in Ukraine has slowed down. So I think it's a signal to the West that Western forces, NATO, the United States should back off from overtly supporting Ukraine. Of course, this is not really the case at this moment, but I think chances that nuclear weapons are going to be used in this conflict are still minimal, and for the time being, I don't really think this is in the cards. I do want to underline that Vladimir Putin has done similar threats in 2014 and 2015 during the first invasion of Ukraine. And what's important now is to watch and see whether there's going to be any significant change in Russian nuclear force posture. Are there going to be more strategic bombers patrolling? What is exactly happening to the Russian ballistic missile submarines and their patrol schedules and so forth? The latter, of course, can only be observed by intelligence agencies. So it depends whether they're going to leak this kind of information to the public.
Now, for many weeks, we've been hearing that Russia's conventional army is far superior to that of Ukraine, but they haven't progressed as far as most had expected. How do you explain that?
Well, we're still in very early stages of this conflict, and I would really like to tell everyone who thinks that he can draw any big conclusions from the first days of fighting that they should really wait and see how this conflict is going to evolve over the next few days and weeks. You're right that the initial advance of the Russians has not been what the Russian General Staff probably expected it to be. Ukrainian resistance has been a lot stronger, but at the end, the Russians still have quantitative and qualitative superiority vis-a-vis the Ukrainian forces. This may change over time, of course, and the biggest question right now, I think, is whether the Russian armed forces can adapt to these changing circumstances. Can they regroup? Can they get the resupplies to their frontline troops? And right now, I do want to underline that Russians are still advancing. Initially, the initial strategy was not to occupy the cities, mind you. The initial strategy, from what we can gauge from current first force deployments, is to destroy the Ukrainian forces, preferably outside of urban centers. So this is what we are seeing right now, not so much a push toward the cities.
So the EU members on Sunday took significant steps to prop up Ukraine's military. What difference will that make, and when will it make a difference?
Well, this largely depends how fast these weapons are going to make it to the front lines. That I'm not sure, to be honest. Secondly, it also depends how quickly the Russian advance are going to be, because if there are no airfields left in a few days from now, it doesn't matter what the European Union will supply the Ukrainian forces with. If they don't have launch pads, essentially, and airports, landing strips to launch these aircrafts and other military equipment. So I think it really depends. It's too early to say. What is clear, though, perhaps to add to this, is that any sort of weapon delivery now will hopefully help Ukraine fight off this Russian aggression.
So how is Russia reacting then to this military support offered by the EU?
I'm not privy to the diplomatic exchanges that have taken place here over the last couple of hours, but what the Russian military will have to do on the ground is to massively step up the lethality of their operations. That is, I think, we're probably going to see more indiscriminate bombings. We're going to see more. The pace of operations is going to pick up, I think, and I think we are likely also going to see just a new ferocity in this fighting in the coming days, because the Russians know that time is against them, essentially. They need to conclude this military campaign as fast as possible. The longer this campaign goes on, the more people, the more manpower and material they're going to lose, and this can, of course, not be in the Russians' interest.
Now, we've been getting reports left, right and centre that morale is high on the Ukrainian side. What about the Russians?
That I cannot really answer from my perspective. There have been some indications that morale is not as high as it should be, but I think we need to take all of this information with a grain of salt, given the proverbial fog of war that is surrounding the military operations in Ukraine at the moment.
Franz Stefan Gadi there, Research Fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Thank you very much for joining us here on DW News.
Thank you.
The United Nations Security Council has called a rare emergency meeting of the 193-member General Assembly. That's due to take place on Monday. 11 of the Council's 15 members voted in favour of the resolution. Russia voted against, while China, India and the United Arab Emirates abstained. Russia was unable to use its veto to block the resolution as the vote was procedural. The US and its allies at the UN say Russia is becoming isolated internationally. The European Union has decided to finance the purchase and delivery of weapons and equipment to Ukraine. It's the first time the EU is sending weapons to a country under attack. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the bloc is also closing its airspace to Russian aircraft and will ban the state-owned media channels Russia Today and Sputnik. She also announced new sanctions targeting the regime of Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko for supporting Russia's invasion. Here's how von der Leyen explained the significance of these developments.
As the war in Ukraine rages on and Ukrainians fight bravely for their country, the European Union steps up once more its support for Ukraine and the sanctions against the aggressor that is Putin's Russia. For the first time ever, the European Union will finance the purchase and delivery of weapons and other equipment to a country that is under attack. This is a watershed moment.
And for more on this, let's bring in DW correspondent Christine Mundwa in Brussels. Christine, what do these latest steps then mean?
Gerhard, it means that for the first time in the European Union's history, it is going to be coordinating efforts in terms of bringing together its military resources and sending them to a third country, in this case to Ukraine, to assist the Ukrainian armed forces. The European Union has set aside some 450 million euros under what is called the European Peace Facility framework. And the difference here is that it is largely going to be used, this money is essentially going to be used to supply the Ukrainian armed forces with lethal ammunition. The European Union has been known to assist in conflict missions around the world, but more from a peace perspective. So not necessarily supplying things like anti-tank missiles, fighter jets and the like, the kind of assistance that is going to be given to the Ukrainian armed forces. So the significance of this cannot be underestimated. It cannot be understated, as we're hearing from Ursula von der Leyen there. It is really a watershed moment for the European Union to take the step in doing this. Indeed, in the weeks leading up to this invasion, we saw individual member states donating military aid to the Ukrainian military, but this was at a bilateral level. And now this effort is being coordinated at a bloc level, at an EU level, and that again is the first time we've ever seen such happen.
So EU defence ministers are also convening today. What can we expect there?
So now it's about the logistics of this, right? I've talked about this 450 million euros that's been set aside. It doesn't mean that the European Union is suddenly going on a shopping spree to buy all this equipment. No, because this is the kind of stuff that you make orders for, and it takes months for delivery. So what they're going to do is they're going to give the Ukrainian armed forces from what is already in the EU stock. By that, I mean, what do individual member countries have? So, for example, some states have loads of anti-tank missiles, others have fighter jets and others not. So they're going to be coordinating who's got what and how then to send that off, of course, to the Ukrainian military. That has to happen soon in the coming days. As you can understand, the situation on the ground as it is unfolding, this has to happen sooner rather than later. So it is expected that the defense ministers will now be coordinating the logistics of that. Bear in mind, the European Union is not a military alliance, so to say, so this is sort of uncharted territory. But many of them are NATO member states, and under the NATO framework, they have participated in a number of maneuvers. So they have the know-how in terms of how to move around equipment. So you can expect they'll use avenues like Poland, Romania, etc., in order to get some of this military aid to the Ukrainians as soon as possible. But Gerhard, going forward, this also now opens up that conversation that Emmanuel Macron has constantly been putting on top of the EU agenda. That is a common defense for the European Union. Up until now, it's been one of those things that the French president has been pushing for, and there's been sort of a lackluster sort of attitude towards it. But I think, having seen this invasion, a lot of EU member states are now thinking about the real probability of a threat to the European Union, and the fact that this becomes more necessary now more than ever. So it's, of course, would be hoped that it remains a theoretical probability or possibility, but the idea of a common European defense, a common European army, is certainly now more real than it's ever been before. Gerhard?
Christine, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for immediate EU membership for his country, assuming Ukraine retains its independence. What are the prospects of the country becoming an EU member state very quickly?
Well, the response to that, perhaps, by the European Council President Charles Michel, I'll give that to you here as he said it. He said, look, the EU already has an association agreement with Ukraine, which can be deepened. So essentially, Charles Michel basically, reducing the expectation there, basically taking it off the table for Ukraine to be granted that EU membership. We know that some member states, Poland, for example, Slovakia, do support the Ukrainians in that they have publicly called for Ukraine to be granted accession into the European Union. But I'll point out here that most EU states, right, the majority of EU states have not officially stated their support for Ukraine's accession into the European Union. So it's difficult to see some kind of an express pathway for the Ukrainians to be granted EU membership at the moment. It does appear that the more preferred option is to increase cooperation in existing frameworks like the Eastern Partnership, for example, but not quite EU membership just yet for Ukraine.
DW correspondent Christine Mundber there reporting from Brussels. Thank you, Christine.